everyone. My name is Linda Kaiser, and I'm the host of The Circle. Today is July 21st, 2016, and I am joined by our guest, Dr. Todd Ovokaitys, as well as Shelley Evans, who's a regular panelist, and Mary Beth Lord, and Catherine Harris. And you'll see them on other shows on The Circle and Global Mission of Peace TV as well. So today our guest is Dr. Todd. We call him Dr. Todd. He's very well known. He is a distinguished graduate of Johns Hopkins University Medical School with both a bachelor's and his medical degree from there. And then he went on to advanced training at Georgetown. He did a residency and chief residency in internal medicine. And then he did a fellowship in pulmonary and intensive care medicine. Dr. Todd is a very well-qualified individual. And I want to start this conversation out by asking him to just briefly explain how he left the path of traditional medicine and became involved more in electromagnetic frequency and the types of situations that might resolve. So could you just give us a little hint of how you ended up where you are now from where you were then?
Sure, Linda. That really happened when I was in the intensive care units at Georgetown doing bronchoscopies on AIDS patients with pneumonia, thinking there must be a better way than what we're now doing. And I had an insight or an inspiration that the structure of HIV, particularly how its nucleic acid is folded, might somehow be different from the way it folds in a human, and that if there is a structural difference based on a principle in physics known as natural resonance or natural frequency, that everything in the universe vibrates at every scale, and depending upon its geometry and its composition, will have a specific fundamental frequency, which then also would translate to its harmonic frequencies. So the idea was we might be able to find a very specific type of frequency pattern that could neutralize HIV as an alternative to using chemical approaches. And that little idea then inspired me to pursue the how of it. And while I did practice medicine for a few years after completing my training, I then really got immersed in biophysics and defining what those frequencies might be and how to apply them.
Wow. So who wants to ask him the first question? Shelley, do you want to start?
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, I don't know to jump right in without giving our viewers a little background. However, the mainstream medical applications are very well known, so I suppose anybody could really just look those up on your website or anything. What I think is so fascinating about how you have branched out in so many areas is I perceive this to be some treatment that could typically really help those kind of people that have fallen through the cracks in our kind of societies, right? People like addicts, people like the veterans, or people that have been exposed to high-level clearances in the military that have been programmed, and even just all of us who have been subjected to the subliminal programming of mainstream medicine, because what we're talking about is phenotype or phenotypic plasticity. You know, to the degree that it can be influenced by environmental factors, and the stem cell plus laser can regress us back to a time. I don't mean regress like most people would think of regressing, age regression. However, it could take these people, all of us really, back to a time pre-conditioning so that we can make better choices from an absolute clear and natural organic place. Is that too expensive? Can we jump in with that? Do we need to provide some background to answer that?
Well, I believe I know where you're coming from with the question. And you make a really good point that there is the current medical paradigm, which is really great for many things. It's the system that I've been trained to. And which many dedicated people have worked very hard to develop the art and the science of it. And I think current medicine is great for the things that it does well, yet it is incomplete. I think the answer to the implied question is that I believe we can evolve to a more complete and more comprehensive type of health program. I wouldn't even call it medicine, because medicine implies that someone needs to be sick before they actually avail themselves to it. I would really describe the opportunity we now have with all the great work that's being done in many areas to take the best of the best and have a system that goes beyond simply trying to mitigate the symptoms of disease to, as you say, turn everything back to before the inflection point of the disease starting, to recreate the terrain of health and to be able to create a much greater overall health. And my view on that is that a more complete system of health would have something like the food pyramid, but a little bit more sophisticated. And the most simplistic way of describing it would be that the ultimate new medicine, or at least an improved version of health and wellness, would be the triad of what I would call nutritional metabolic medicine, frequency medicine, and psycho-emotional medicine. And I simplify it by saying that nutritional metabolic, I would include anything that is chemical. So for giving the body what it needs to return to a state of health or to support health, or even to go beyond ordinary health to what I would call supreme well-being, being super healthy, super fit, super smart, super everything. I think all that is possible, not just settling for health as defined by the absence of disease. That the metabolic part, I would start with given the things that the body naturally uses. So, the core factors of health, good nutrition, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, amino acids, nucleic acids, phytonutrients, antioxidants, and then specialized nutritional factors. That's part of it. And I think the core of any great program for anyone with any issue is putting all those factors in an ideal balance. And that's, in fact, where our laser technology comes in, because we have multiple lines of evidence. So we can take any of those nutritional factors, whether it's for a plant, a pet, or a person, and make it work significantly better. At some point, I might share the scientific data we have in those regards. And I would also, yes.
No, Corey, please go ahead, please.
I would also include in metabolic medicine that sometimes there really is a use for quote unquote medicinal chemistry. There is a place for the use of pharmaceutical agents, and I would view it as using a minimalist approach of using only what's needed at the lowest dose and for the minimum amount of time. But there are times where pharmacology and therapeutic compounds are immensely helpful and have a place, and they'll tend to work better in a person who is nutritionally complete and balanced than one in whom you overlay that in a sea of nutritional imbalances or toxicities for that matter. And so detox is part of the metabolic medicine too. And then I would actually, being a lumper rather than a splitter in this case, I would include the whole emerging area of stem cell therapy in metabolic medicine, because the cell, for all intents and purposes, is a collection of chemicals in a very organized fashion. And
I'm sorry.
Yes. So the work we're evolving in terms of stem cell research is using electromagnetic signatures to wake up dormant stem cells in tissue, especially those that are in blood, that have remained, in essence, in a one-day-old state of hibernation. And that can be for many years until they're given the signal to wake up. And upon waking up, they can be as robust as newborn stem cells and a perfect match to that person, and have the memory and information within them to provide the support to rebuild virtually any tissue in the body from head to toe. So that's the metabolic side. Then there's frequency medicine, because everything in the universe vibrates. And if you provide the right vibrational signatures, you can augment the function of any chemical or biological system. And there's multiple different frequency medicine approaches. That would be a lengthy, detailed discussion into itself. And we also participate in that by even doing modeling to define the specific way molecules vibrate, so we can use those signatures to create specific desirable effects in biological chemistry. And then the third part of the equation is what I would call psycho-emotional medicine. And this is the idea that almost any condition under the sun, from very minor things like stubbing your toe to major diseases that are the bane of medicine, can be a function of an unrelieved, unconscious emotional stress or conflict. And that the disease is basically the best biological solution the brain can create with the tools that it has at hand. And often the ultimate key, not only to taking someone back to a place before there was any indication of imbalance or lack of health, the key often to sustaining the state of well-being, even if a problem can be put into remission, is to address the psycho-emotional piece, allow someone to go through a method, and there are several, and there's one that I like in particular called biological decoding, which is really designed to be diagnosis-driven, and in which the particular conflicts have been very well delineated based upon the particular diagnosis the person has, to have a pathway to assist the person to find what's been hidden, make it conscious, release the emotional retained charge and stress, and then allow the affected organs to repair. So putting all those together, I think, creates a comprehensive platform for addressing mind, body, being, and spirit in sophisticated nutritional, biochemical, and vibrational sense, so that not only can we be put into a greater state of health no matter where it starts from, though we can actually start to aspire to far higher degrees of health and wellness than has been the case before.
Right, and those all do correlate and kind of interface with our own natural organic systems, for example, the plasma. And so if you did want to go into some of the technical details, would you be able to tell us how you harvest the stem cells, or how the laser perhaps interfaces with the plasma?
Now, if we're getting into a stem cell discussion, that is an immensely technical area, and there are many different sources of stem cells and many different types of actions of stem cells, and a variety of ways of preparing the cells. And I think there's a lot of confusion in this area, because stem cell therapy just gets this overall aura of something that sounds really powerful, is probably going to be developed to be incredibly useful someday, but has this feeling of being somewhere off on the horizon. It has the specter of issues that occurred in a previous presidential reign, where a particular type of stem cell was banned from being further researched, which is specifically the embryonic stem cells. And so there's a lot of jargon around stem cells, and particularly the debates and ethical issues that arose over the embryonic stem cells, that make people both excited and nervous about it. So as a way of putting some clarity into the confusion, I can say a little bit about the different sources and types of cells, and then a little bit about their preparation, and even what's currently allowed by US regulatory guidelines. And of course, that differs from country to country as well. So the embryonic stem cells, and the reason there's an ethical debate is that those were largely derived from in vitro fertilization.
Right.
And one of the biggest problems in the area is that with IVF, there may be a variety of the potential embryos that would be used for the process of facilitating conception and childbirth that are beyond those that would actually be used. So some get created that don't have a use, and the reality is if they don't have a use, they generally will get incinerated.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this is not my area, it's not what I work in, but the issue from the ethical standpoint is, well, is it better to destroy them or is it better to use them for a therapeutic purpose?
Right.
And there are some factions that believe that they shouldn't be used for any purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to weigh in on either side of that debate, other than to say that embryonic stem cells are the only types of stem cells that are associated with potentially significant medical complications. So it's as much a medical issue as it is an ethical issue with the embryonic cells. The particular problem with true embryonic stem cells that come from early stage embryos is that they can form a type of tumorous mass called a teratoma.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's interesting.
yes, and for those that don't know that term, it's a little esoteric. Because the embryonic cells can become any of the three germ layers of the body, which are called endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, and each of those create different specific structures in the body, that a teratoma can be as big as a grapefruit or even a cantaloupe, and they tend to occur in spaces where that big of a mass can grow without causing a lot of problems, like the abdominal cavity, for example.
Right, like a dermoid cyst or something.
Right, that would be another name for a teratoma.
Right.
So you can have this cantaloupe-sized hairball that has bones and teeth and cartilage and muscle and blood vessels and virtually any type of tissue you can imagine.
Yeah, you take them out, they're full of hair. It's bizarre.
Right. So that is the potential complication of the embryonic cells, and there are other types of cells that are so good and potentially useful that I personally would not choose to work with the embryonic cells anyway. So once you get out of that category, you get into ethically secure ground, and I'd say that would start with the use of umbilical cord blood. So when a baby is born, there is, of course, the umbilical cord that's attached to the placenta, and there are approximately 30 to 50 cc's of blood in the cord, and some additional blood can be sort of nursed out of the placenta. And this is a very rich source of a multitude of different types of stem cells. Because the baby is making all sorts of different tissues, there are stem cells within cord blood that are already geared to become nerves, called neural stem cells. There are those that are ready to become muscle and connective tissue called mesenchymal stem cells. Those are ready to become blood cells called hematopoietic. Hemato meaning blood and poietic meaning to make. And that and several other types of stem cells that are already called pluripotential. They can become many different types of cells. So one of the types of sources, namely cord blood, is one that I think is particularly interesting and useful. And within cord blood, there can be a very basic use, which is called unmatched. So basically blood from any cord could be used for any person. And because the tissue antigens that cause an immune reaction are generally poorly developed in cord blood, that even an unmatched cord blood transfusion can give many reparative benefits. And then a more sophisticated approach is actually matching the tissue type of the cord to the tissue type of the recipient, called matched cord blood. And that is a very elevated and advanced type of treatment. So beyond cord blood, which I think is a particularly preferred source of stem cells that in the US is still heavily regulated and only typically formally allowed in the context of approved clinical studies, that we get into what is called autologous stem cells. So the main terms that are used with stem cells are either allogeneic, which means it comes from another source, like getting cord blood from a newborn that the parents have decided not to keep. Sometimes parents do, because it can be useful if a child develops certain types of health issues later. So cord blood banking for newborns is common, and I think is a good idea, actually. And for those that don't choose to make that investment, then the blood becomes generally available in cord blood banks. So beyond that, as an allogeneic source, we get into what would be called autologous. So autologous means the cells come from that person and they go back to that person. And the main sources of autologous stem cells are peripheral blood. That's easy, it's just a blood draw. The fat tissue, and there's a particular type of stem cell called mesenchymal stem cells that come from fat. And those have been used quite well for repairing joints or muscle tissue or other types of connective tissue, in some cases even for internal organs. There are also stem cells in bone marrow, but it's a little bit more invasive to get the cells out of bone marrow, particularly putting a big bore needle into a hip and pulling out the blood that is in there, which is a rich source of stem cells. And even dental pulp has been used as a source of stem cells.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. I love all of that. But maybe if we brought it back to a little later area, we could discuss the laser element, because
Sure.
That's such a huge application.
And what I'd say there is that for any of these sources of cells in the different locations around the world where we're allowed to use one type of cell or another, what we've generally found is that if it is an autologous source of cells from the same person or an allogeneic source like cord blood, if we use our laser technology in a certain way, we can activate those cells to become more capable of sticking to where we want them to stick. There is a type of molecule in the body called a cell adhesion molecule, and there are different classes, but the one we particularly have studied is called integrins, and it's called that because they maintain the integrity of tissue. And we've developed a particular signal that when we apply it to stem cells from various sources, it increases their production of integrins. It makes them stickier. And probably the most significant thing that we've done with our work is we've created a specific type of homing signal. So it's a vibrational pattern that we can transmit through tissue that attracts stem cells to go where that signature is. So that allows the ability to, say, send a signature to the heart or a particular part of the brain or to a joint, and to have an increased likelihood of having the stem cells not only going there, but sticking there. And once a stem cell sticks to an area, the local microenvironment, the chemical factors and signatures that the cells send to each other from that tissue will be the key factor for allowing the right type of tissue to be produced in the location that you want it to be produced.
So could you give us an example of some of the things that are going on in society today that you could perhaps treat very differently with this type of application?
So it's probably safe to say that we are in a research and development mode and working with different labs around the world. And the areas that are the most useful, I believe, are in the neurologic, cardiac, and joint arena. And with joints, I will say that there are a variety of procedures, especially using autologous stem cells, and that this is widely practiced in the US also, is that the autologous cells can be injected directly into the target location. They will tend to stay there. So if, say, autologous fat is harvested from someone's abdomen or inner thigh, and it's processed to separate out the stem cells, and that is injected into a knee, for example, that because the cells are right where you want them, there is a reasonably good tendency for the cells to find a way to stick and to create a regenerative and reparative response. So for those areas where it's fairly easy to apply the cells into a closed space and have them stay there, the modalities for that are working generally pretty well. And there again, it depends upon matching the right source of the cell, the right preparation, and the right administration process. When it gets to other areas like the cardiovascular and nervous system, the interesting, if not exciting area is that the ability to provide a guidance mechanism where we can send a set of three-dimensional localizing homing signatures, as it were, or attractant signatures to get the cells to go there and stay there, that we are tending to see an ability to get a reparative or balancing result that tends to be quite a lot faster than is otherwise seen. If cells are injected in, then the hope is that they randomly get to where you want them to go. Now, in the stem cell world, it's generally thought that the main stimulus for getting a cell there is if there's an active inflammatory process. And if there is an active inflammatory activity for whatever the cause of the inflammation would be, that will tend to get cells there. It's a greater challenge if there is not an active process, if it's an old healed injury of some sort, then in particular, having some way for the cells to know where it would be desirable for them to go. And by virtue of applying these three-dimensional homing signatures, where we work to get the strongest signature in the volume of tissue where it's most needed, we really have seen some very promising results, both in neurologic work and in cardiac work.
Care to go any further than that, or would you not be able to describe something that might be coming in medicine? Not necessarily here today, but what will medicine look like in a few years?
I'd say there's two different aspects to that. And the first is the therapeutic aspect. And I believe that when we combine the three modalities, the best of metabolic medicine, that can include the best of pharmacology also, and the best of what will be ultimately the world of stem cell medicine, with frequency medicine, and especially with psycho-emotional medicine, that we will have much more capability to take on even those conditions that have the greatest difficulty of having a solution at the moment. Right. I think there's a lot of very encouraging work that we are in the midst of creating solutions where there have not been solutions before.
Mary Beth, you want to jump in for a minute?
Well, sure. I mean, I love all of the medical aspects of this, but I also, being a Reiki master, I'm really interested in, all of the alternative healings. And I do believe that, we all have the ability to heal. And I think that, we're getting closer to the areas now that you're talking about actually, finding that our own stem cells could be regenerated and actually come back and heal us and take us back to prior times when, before any damage has happened to cells or whatever. So that to me is really exciting. But also energy healing to me is really, it's just fascinating. And it takes me, back to when we were younger and hearing that, even from the Bible, that Jesus said all that he can do, we can do greater than. And I do believe that we have the ability to do this. And I think what you and so many other doctors and scientists are rediscovering is the fact that our bodies can heal, that we have the ability, whether it's through emotional and psychological and really believing that we have the ability to do this, or by going and learning about, the energy that's available out there for us to heal. And like you're saying, of course, using, our own stem cell or, pharmaceuticals, whatever we have out there. And of course, going back to a lot of the ancient ways of healing, the ancient herbs. And so I just love listening to everything that you're talking about, but I always go back to holistic. I think that we're just on the bridge now. We're crossing over to the point where we're going to do all of this.
And for example, for any person, if their goal is greater health in general, if they're completely well, or if they have a particular system that is compromised, we specialize in developing what I would call individualized metabolic programs. So what is the ideal supportive nutritional biochemistry for that person that gets put together in full chemical pathways, and also with an enhancement process with the laser technology to increase the bioavailability. So a balanced, individualized nutritional metabolic program is part of enhanced health for anyone, even if they don't have any particular condition. It's about going from ordinary health to supreme health. So I think the other part of the equation is, beyond all the work that's being done to find solutions where there have been none, I believe we're aspiring to a situation where we can raise the bar on longevity. We can completely shift, how long people can be in basically young, youthful, highly functional bodies. And we can even increase the potential level of function for every organ system from head to toe. So I think we're going into this exciting zone of exploring the full human potential, in part for health and well-being, and then what abilities can we aspire to in basic functions and even so-called esoteric or subtle functions.
Now, Catherine wanted to ask you a question about the pineal tones that you do. Can you do that, Catherine?
Sure. Yes, I watched the Creation Choir this morning, and I was so impressed by a number of things. One is that this is healing that's taking place at a community level where everyone is being entrained into these frequencies. And that is kind of a different level of psycho-emotional healing, perhaps, on the community level, which we really need. That was enhanced even more by the incorporation of the grandmothers and the indigenous instruments. And that's another healing that we need. And what it made me think of is that we're using, or what I see you doing there is using sound, of which we are made. Basically, we're made from music, and using sound, which is a certain, spectrum of frequency, to heal these higher frequencies. Because when I think of the pineal, I think of it as a light receptive organ because it has some crystalline properties. And so you're using lower frequencies to heal higher frequencies. And what I was really curious about is it's quite a long piece of music that is performed.
Right.
And so I was curious, first of all, about how do you determine the starting pitch for healing the pineal? Because where I heard it was somewhere around 368 hertz 369 on my piano, which is out of tune. But I thought certainly you must be using an even-numbered frequency, even-numbered starting tone to generate those beautiful harmonics that come from the rounded, I would call it the rounded frequency. So how do you find that starting pitch from which all the other frequencies are generated? And then I hear the choir moving between whole tones. Sometimes they're moving in half tones. And how was this whole long piece created was it a collaborative endeavor?
Okay, before you answer that, let me just jump in and ask you to please explain just briefly what she's talking about, the creation choir.
Sure. So the question relates to a modality that I have called the pineal toning technique. And there is a whole story, of course, that goes with it. This is more in the realm of vibrational medicine at a profound personal level. And the work with the tones is in part an inspiration and even part an assignment from what I would describe as my spiritual mentorship. And the use of tones and tonal patterns is very ancient. And almost everyone has heard the recordings, say, of the gorgeous overtones and harmonics, either of Gregorian chanting or of Tibetan monks, for example, which is extraordinarily beautiful and very moving.
Yes.
The pineal tones are similar to that, and it goes to yet another level, because beyond an individual practice, there can be a whole group practice. And instead of singing individual tones, then we have large groups of people singing different patterns. And the complexity comes from singing two or more different, both vowel patterns. Sometimes the vowel patterns are different as well. And then the fundamental frequencies at which they're sung are different. And you get very rich arcades of overtones and harmonics. And you're astute to have realized that there are many halftones that are used. So that this method is not one that is based upon conventional musical principles. And the scoring is basically all from, I'm told, remembering a time where that was a method used for gathering communities in harmony and for being a method of healing and repair, and beyond that, for really creating states of enhanced awareness. And in doing that, I was very careful not to be pulled into conventional musical frequencies. And to create the choirs, I invoked some very knowledgeable professional conductors, and it drove them crazy in the scoring because many of the notes were in between the notes. And I either had to let them shift it to the closest note or kind of compel them in some cases to stick with the halftones. And I wanted to be as mathematically precise to the precept of this method that it's not limited to the conventional musical scale and the conventional musical frequencies. It's a type of complex mathematical system where the frequencies play against each other to create very high frequency overtones. And we were told through our magnetic mentor in creating this process that we would create frequencies in the supra-audible range of 50,000 hertz or greater. So I actually tested that with the recordings, and we do in fact do that. So a lot of the dynamic action and the effects on biology and even the effects on consciousness are due to the supra-audible frequencies being produced.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very ancient medicine, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yes.
Yeah.
I'm told it goes back a full galactic cycle of 26,000 years.
That is so interesting. Thank you.
And the Creation Choir was a gathering of about 300 singers, half singing the fundamental tones and the other half singing the harmonic tones in general. And it was done in Australia in one of the most sacred sites on the planet, Ayers Rock, also known as Uluru, which is home to a civilization that is said to be at least 60,000 years old, that was quite receptive to having the ancient patterns being presented there. And we were actually quite warmly received by the indigenous people there. And we did the best we could to stay within their cultural idioms, and having the support of that deep ancestry there and the energy of that geography and geology and history was another amplifying factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed was, the use of the conch trumpet, which that seems to be pervasive. It's in the New World. It's in the Old World. It appears in different places. So that's a very ubiquitous kind of instrument. But it was just lovely to see the community in that effort. It's beautiful.
And for your interest, the most recent choir was done in the U.S., in, of all places, Arkansas.
Really?
And you may say, what in the world would take you to Arkansas? And it turns out that at Mount Ida, there is the world's largest single deposit of quartz.
Yes, I've been there, and I've seen the huge specimens, and I got my moldavite there. It's a fantastic, magical place.
It's a powerful spot. So imagine having a choir of 400, 200 singing one set of tones and 200 singing another, amplified by an inverted mountain of crystal.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was extraordinary.
Is that recorded somewhere where we can reference it or find it?
Yes, it was recorded, and I think we're in the final stages of that being mastered, so people will be able to enjoy it. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Shelley, do you have other questions that you'd like to talk about?
Sure, I have so many questions. We'll need several more shows, but really, I love the overlapping of this coherent light comes forward in all these different ways to facilitate your treatment. But really, what we're talking about here is shareable magnetism, right? That's following symmetry and conductivity. It is the science of teaching peace, essentially, is what I'm hearing you talking about. This is peace creation.
That's certainly an intention of it, absolutely. And in that regard, last October, we had a choir in Israel that was called the Peace Choir. And it got people from that region to not necessarily hold hands, but to create vibrations in a way that were so harmonious. The intention was, as it were, creating a wave of magnetic stillness to support balancing in that part of the world.
Yeah, and also just the fact that we're talking about crystal, and we have our own crystalline palace here, the pituitary, thalamus, pineal. What we're doing is enabling the memory of that frequency to be born again, essentially. So that's a really fast shortcut. Straight past a lot of allopathic medicine, straight to the heart of the matter.
Yep, absolutely.
Right, and so we've talked a lot about brain mechanism and whatever, communication between neurons and so on, but where does the heart figure into all this? We're really just beginning to invite the heart back into our conversation and let it even lead the way. So where in laser or in your frequency medicine, where does the heart become a leader?
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting question. The final piece of the crystal choir just done in Arkansas, that by the nomenclature of the levels that build progressively is named level 32. And the intention of that level is opening the heart of compassion.
Mm, right.
So a series of specific sound syllables and frequency patterns that has the focused intention of opening the heart of compassion. So there's a vibrational pattern that's not even just about opening the heart, it's about amplifying that particular characteristic of compassion, which of course is seated in a way biologically in the heart, but everything really works together in the heart, body, mind. And the magnetic patterns created in the heart as probably the strongest and most coherent generator of electromagnetic energy in the body, then quickly aligns with the electromagnetic patterns created in the brain, and that percolates through the rest of the biology as an important set of signatures that condition the way the cells work, the way the genetic code is activated, influences so-called epigenetics, which is creating the right environment. It is known we can actually turn genes on and off.
Right. And I want to jump in here and just say one thing about what you just said. I think sometimes we miss the fact that it isn't just the heart, that it is the whole process. And I notice sometimes in conversations we all want to be heart-centered, which is great, but we are a whole being, and certain frequencies resonate differently. That's all I wanted to say.
Right. That we can ascribe particular functions to certain organs, yet at a certain level, it's probably useful to realize that every single cell in the body is in its own way aware.
Exactly.
And so then it would extrapolate to include oneness, all of humanity. This could just, faster than osmosis, the 100th monkey scenario.
Because every
It could
cell
suddenly be an entirely new race of beings.
Yeah. Each of our cells is a brain in and of itself.
Well, if you aspire to Bruce Lipton's work, he would even suggest that the brain is in the membrane.
Exactly. I know, he does that. Do you agree with that?
He makes a really good argument. I think it's a bit simplistic.
It is, but that he's trying to teach, we're simple folk out here. We didn't go to Johns Hopkins and then to Georgetown, and so you've got to, in a certain sense, you do have to simplify things, I think.
Well,
not oversimplify, perhaps.
He makes a beautiful argument for the importance of the environment and how we create our environment and how that conditions our biology.
Right.
And how the environment of our cells is critically important to the health and function of our cells. And the way we use our mind is a powerful conditioning factor on how everything works. Right. And I really think that it's an important point of looking at the systems in a way as unified systems.
Right.
And so within a given person, I think it's not a big stretch to say there is a unified field of DNA communication. And so the membrane is important, and I really get Bruce's concept, and it's a very huge contribution to understanding. And yet within that, there's also the DNA patterns, which I think are hugely important in creating a very cohesive, unifying, unitary environment for the being, especially once you start clearing the toxicity, clearing limiting belief patterns, starting to accept the fact that we can live longer, be healthier, and do more than we've believed before.
Yeah, we're very pre-programmed, aren't we? Sadly.
Yeah.
And the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I see that that's exactly what you're doing. So thank you very much. And I look forward to exploring more.
Absolutely.
Yes, well,
I'm back again.
probably time for us to wrap up. We've gone a little bit over, but that's okay because you're a fascinating guest and I would like to have you back just to continue this conversation after you have a chance to watch it and see if that might be interesting for you. Would you consider that perhaps?
Oh, I would be happy to do that. And this was somewhat introductory in the broad scope of things.
Right. So
I think there might be some enjoyment of taking a particular area and going deeply into it and even sharing some examples of it. I might even sing for you.
I would love that. We would all love that. Okay. Well, I think that will conclude today's edition of The Circle, and I want to extend our thanks to you so much, and we look forward to having you back on the show again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Todd.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much.